It was that urgency and the quick reaction of Pakistan which enabled us to complete the job well ahead of any Muslim country, well ahead of any developing country. The middle of 1961, President Ayub had been invited by President Kennedy on an official visit to USA. And that is when Professor Salam was accompanying him. So I didn't know this. And in my telephone in my apartment rang, and at the other end was Professor Salam. He said, "Tariq, I don't have much time. You better reach Washington tomorrow morning and join me in an important meeting." So that's how the next day we ended up in the spanking new offices of NASA on the Capitol, and met the director there, who welcomed and said, "I'll come straight to the point, which is that President Kennedy has challenged NASA to land a man on the moon." The purpose was to get to know the wind structure over the Indian Ocean, up in heights of 50 to 100 kilometers. That is where the atmosphere is supposed to become so thin that it is considered to be finished. And this info was needed by NASA before they could send their Apollo capsule to the moon. This information was needed. Aim was that before the next monsoon season, summer of 1962, we should be ready for launchings, because everybody knew that in Indian Ocean, from early June, in fact, you could cut it down to the day, that they said around 6th or 7th of June, you will have the monsoon clouds coming in. And when the monsoon clouds come, you cannot do this experiment known as the sodium vapor experiment. So everything had to be done before that time. I had no bureaucratic training. I didn't know anything about projects, but we knew that the job needed to be done. So I had a requirement to get a person in every specialty. So we did this selection. Our 5-member team consisted of Mr. Salim Mahmood. He was the specialist in electronics. There was Mr. Rahmatullah. He was assigned by the meteorological department. He happened to be a deputy director there. The third one was retired Flight Lieutenant Faruqi. He had joined us after retirement from the Air Force. He was a communication specialist. Finally, the youngest member was Sikandar Zaman, mechanical engineer. All these 5 were very good in their fields. Got on with the task. What it involved was to plan a range with the help of Americans, to survey the site, which President Ayub himself gave us a tip. He said that there is an army artillery range in Sonmiani, not far from Karachi. And that seemed to meet all our requirements, except that it was considered too near to Karachi. You know, rockets can go wrong, things go wrong, and we didn't want any one of them landing in Karachi. But still, because it was infrastructure was developed there. We never worked to 9 to 5 type of a thing, because Sonmiani was hot in summer, and the idea was to get the job done. So we were putting up in the army sort of buildings. We would get up Fajr time in the morning, go to the range, start our work, and by about 11, 12 o'clock, it would become unbearable because we had to work out on the launcher. There was no shade there. So we would break off at that time, come back to the range, have lunch, siesta, and by about 4 o'clock, be ready to go back and have another session. And that session would go on till it was needed, whether it is 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, at times even past 12 o'clock. So, in other words, there were no working hours. The job had to be done, and the job dictated the speed at which. We had been checking the circuitry, checking our procedures, seeing it, because I repeat, the window of launch was very close, because if you cannot launch before sunset, and you cannot delay it, because if you delay it, the sun would go below the horizon and it will no longer shine on the. So we had a few minutes window. So everything had to be ready for that quick window, you see. So, well, as it happened with our very first launch, something did go wrong. When we exercised just before sunset, the last exercise, we kept on doing exercises. The last exercise, somehow Salim was pushing the launch button, the signal was not appearing at the rocket end. This was, it shook us. The concerned 3 people, we dashed to test the circuitry, and a simple error had been made. But we luckily found it in the last few minutes, not seconds. It was correct, and hence we did manage to launch exactly a few minutes after sunset. Often people compare it that, look, our neighborly countries, India for example, is shooting rockets to the moon as well as to Mars. Commendable achievement on the part of India. Although they were, through the 1960s, we were ahead of them, but then we fell behind. India had a very systematic program, and they put in far greater resources into it, and they've done a very good job. But also we should remember that the requirements of every country are not the same, you see. If Pakistan has limited resources, we must be careful where do we spend those resources. And please, a moon shot or a Mars shot, it takes not crores but tens of crores of rupees. So do you want to spend your limited resources into something which is really more of, even Americans, remember, they did the Apollo moon program, and then for 40 years, they've never gone back to the moon. So what I'm trying to say is that it is not necessarily the best use of your money. So if Pakistan, because of limited resources, concentrating those resources not on these big shots, but on other more serious things like communication satellite, like Earth resources satellite, like, for example, how do you know how much snow has fallen over the Himalayas? Because that snow will melt and give us water in the Indus. And to know that in advance is a big thing. So that information is of greater value for Pakistan's agriculture than going around the moon, you see. So I think SUPARCO has done well, but there is always room for improvement.